All right, ready to dive deep, because today we're tackling a listener request, the Encomienda system.
Ooh, getting into some juicy history. I like it.
We're starting with this Wikipedia article you all shared.
Right.
And let me tell you, this isn't just some dusty history lesson.
Yeah.
This is about understanding how a system from centuries ago can still have ripples today.
It's amazing how often the past reaches out and touches the present. Right.
Absolutely.
And the encomienda system. It's a prime example.
Yeah, so let's get into it.
Let's define it. A Spanish labor system.
Okay.
Used during their colonization of the Americas and the Spanish East Indies.
So we're talking
Basically, it was a way to reward conquerors with the forced labor of the conquered.
reward system is one way to put it.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that jumped out at me. This whole system, it wasn't some new idea cooked up in the Americas.
Interesting.
Our Wikipedia article points out its roots in the Spanish Reconquista.
Okay.
Now, for anyone who needs a refresher, the Reconquista was this centuries-long battle where Christian kingdoms were pushing back against Islamic rule in the Iberian Peninsula.
It was a defining era for Spain, shaping their worldview and tactics.
For sure.
They ultimately saw the conquest of the Americas as an extension of the Reconquista, applying the same system to a new population.
Like a playbook they'd already perfected, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And the language they used is fascinating, right? This verb, encomendar, meaning to entrust. It's almost like they're painting this picture of benevolent guardianship.
Absolutely. The Spanish emphasized this narrative of protection and education in exchange for indigenous labor and tribute.
Right, like it's a fair trade.
On paper, it sounds almost fair.
Almost.
Of course, history rarely plays out so neatly.
Never does.
And this seemingly simple idea of entrusting labor would have far-reaching consequences.
Okay, so we've got this system rooted in conquest, dressed up in paternalistic language.
Right.
But how did it actually work on the ground?
Yeah.
One thing that surprised me, it wasn't about land ownership in the way many people might assume.
You're right. It's a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
Conquerors weren't given ownership of the land itself.
Right.
Instead, they were granted the right to extract labor and tribute from specific indigenous communities living on that land.
So control over people rather than the actual territory.
Exactly.
What?
And that control manifested in different ways.
Like what?
We're talking gold and silver in some regions, agricultural products in others, all produced through the forced labor of the indigenous population.
It's crazy how they were able to get away with that for so long.
Well,
Like, how was that even allowed?
the article even highlights this drawing of Francisco Hernández Girón, a Spanish encomendero who vehemently opposed any law that even hinted at protecting indigenous people.
Wow, so he was all for it.
He essentially wanted free rein to exploit them.
It's chilling to think that this wasn't an unintended consequence. It was the system working as designed.
It was.
And it wasn't just Spanish colonists wielding power.
Right.
This system was also designed to exploit existing indigenous leadership.
That's right.
So they were using the existing power structures to their advantage.
The Spanish were savvy about leveraging pre-existing power structures for their own ends.
Fine.
Local chiefs were tasked with mobilizing their own people to meet the tribute demands, effectively becoming enforcers within their own communities.
Wow, so they were really playing both sides.
They were playing the system.
It's easy to judge from our modern perspective
Right.
and wonder, how could a system so obviously brutal gain a foothold?
Yeah.
But you have to remember, even back then, the encomienda system wasn't without its critics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even in Spain, there were fierce debates about the morality of the whole system.
Interesting.
It wasn't universally accepted, not by a long shot.
The article mentions one particularly vocal critic, Bartolomé de las Casas, a priest who witnessed the encomienda system firsthand and became a passionate advocate for indigenous rights. It sounds like he really risked his neck to speak out against these injustices.
He did.
So he was really putting it all on the line.
Las Casas saw the brutality, the exploitation, and he called it out for what it was, a violation of human dignity and a rejection of Christian principles.
Wow.
His writings and speeches became powerful indictments of the system.
And it wasn't just words.
Right.
The article also mentions this document, the Codex Kingsborough, which uses vivid images to depict the suffering inflicted under the encomienda system.
It's a poignant example of indigenous voices finding ways to resist and expose the truth.
Powerful.
These weren't just abstract arguments for them. It was their daily reality, captured in drawings that spoke volumes.
With such powerful voices speaking out against the encomienda,
Yeah.
were there any attempts to reform the system? Or was it too entrenched to change?
There were attempts,
Okay.
though you could argue whether they truly address the root of the problem.
Right.
The new laws of 1542,
Okay.
for example,
Yeah.
were designed to curb some of the worst abuses.
So like regulations and stuff.
They aimed to provide some protections for indigenous populations and theoretically move away from this blatant exploitation.
So less about dismantling the system, more about making it slightly less inhumane.
Essentially.
Yeah.
And it eventually led to the Encomienda system being formally replaced by the Repartimiento system.
Okay. New name. But was it really a new system?
Imagine you're an indigenous person living under this new Repartimiento system.
Okay, yeah.
Sure, you're not tied to one specific encomendero anymore,
Okay.
but you're now at the mercy of a bureaucracy that can still demand your labor, albeit for a set period and supposedly with some oversight from the crown.
Right. So it's like
It wasn't exactly free to...
more like trading one overseer for another.
Right.
But even with attempts at reform, the article doesn't shy away from addressing the darkest consequence of this system. Accusations of genocide.
Yeah.
That's a heavy word, and not one to be thrown around lightly.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The scale of suffering under the Encomienda raises this incredibly difficult question.
Of course.
Some historians argue that the system's brutality, combined with the introduction of European diseases to which indigenous populations had no immunity, created a perfect storm that decimated entire communities.
Right.
It was a demographic catastrophe.
But I imagine there are other perspectives on this.
Right.
It's hard to believe disease alone could cause such widespread devastation.
That's where the historical debate gets really complex.
Yeah.
There are scholars who argue that, while horrific, the Encomienda system might not be solely responsible for the population collapse.
Okay.
They point to the fact that diseases like smallpox were already present in the Americas, spreading even before the system became deeply entrenched.
So more like a combination of factors, each one amplifying the other's devastating impact.
Precisely.
Wow.
It's rarely a simple equation in history.
Right.
But what's undeniable is that the indigenous populations suffered immensely under this system.
Right.
Whether directly due to forced labor, the spread of disease, or the psychological toll of being subjugated.
It's a grim picture.
It is.
And even though the Encomienda system was officially abolished in 1791, its legacy didn't just disappear overnight. How is it that something that ended centuries ago can still have such a hold on the present?
It's like echoes. You know,
Echoes.
even when the original sound is gone, those reverberations can linger.
Oh.
And in the case of the Encomienda system, those echoes are still shaping societies today.
Okay, so walk me through this.
Okay.
We're talking about a system abolished in 1791.
Right.
What are some tangible ways its legacy still impacts the present,
Okay.
particularly in Latin America?
Well, think about it this way. The Encomienda system wasn't just about labor. It was about power.
Okay.
It created a system where wealth, land, and social standing were concentrated in the hands of a select few, those of European descent who benefited from the exploitation of indigenous people.
So you're saying this system basically baked inequality into the very foundation of these societies?
Precisely. And that legacy of inequality, it's something many Latin American countries are still grappling with today.
It's hard to imagine.
And you see it in land ownership patterns where descendants of those early landholding families often still hold vast tracts of land.
Oh, yeah.
And you see it in the persistent socioeconomic disparities between different racial and ethnic groups.
It's like this system, even though it's long gone, continues to cast a shadow on the present.
It does.
And it makes you wonder, are there any modern-day parallels?
Yeah.
Because forced labor, exploitation, those things didn't vanish when the Encomienda system ended.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
We continue to see echoes of these systems in various forms around the world.
Like,
think about industries where workers are trapped in exploitative conditions, often with little to no rights or recourse.
it's a reminder that history isn't just something in textbooks. It's the foundation on which our present is built.
Absolutely.
Right.
And understanding these historical systems like the Encomienda
Yeah.
helps us make sense of these present-day injustices.
Right.
It allows us to ask tougher questions about power, exploitation, and whose voices are often silenced.
It's like that saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Exactly.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the Spanish Reconquista to the complexities of the Encomienda system and its enduring legacy.
Right.
We've seen how a system designed for conquest and profit had repercussions that continue to resonate centuries later.
And the key takeaway, Keep asking those tough questions.
Yeah.
When you see inequality, when you see exploitation, don't just accept it as the way things are.
Right.
Dig deeper, unpack the history, and consider, how might those echoes of the past still be shaping our present?
It's a call to action for all of us.
It is.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder these connections.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.